It seems to have disappeared. All right, maybe we should just get started. I don't know what the difficulty is, but he will join, I'm sure, quickly at some point.
I think so.
We're running a bit late already, so better to go. All right, Hussein, shall I begin? Okay, I want to welcome excellencies, professors, special guests, and ladies and gentlemen to this last webinar for this year, 2022, of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. I am the chairman of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. My name is Stephen Brouwer, for those who might not know me. And I'm very pleased to have a very interesting and dynamic panel for the last webinar for this year. I'm going to, before I turn it over to our first speaker, who will be His Excellency Ambassador Xue, I'm going to make a brief summary of the work that the BRICS has been doing over the past year or year and a half, as well as what the objectives will be, in order to make a clear picture, to give a clear picture of the directions that we want to go and where we have come. So if possible, I would like to share the screen, if I can make a, if you will allow me, Hussein, then I can.
You can do it.
Okay, let me. Is that seen?
No. You want me to help?
Yeah, I'm trying. It's open now, but I'm trying to put it on for all the speakers. I don't know why it's not.
Is it the map?
Yeah, that's one, but there's several. Anyway, it's let me see if I can. No. That's not so. Share screen.
Maybe we let His Excellency the Ambassador speak.
Wait, it's coming.
Yeah.
Now. I think you can see it now.
Yes.
Okay, great. This is just a brief outline of today's webinar, the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, which is focused on the outcome and implications of the 20th National Congress of the Communist Party of China and what will be the impact on the Belt and Road Initiative. Fundamentally, this is a new era in human history, which is emerging. It is high time for Sweden and Europe to recognize and join these developments in the spirit of cooperation and friendship. This is a brief outline of the focus of the Belt and Road, which was put out by the BRICS in the very beginning as a outline for what global connectivity means. I think many people are familiar with the general picture, but I want all the participants to see that this is not something that focuses only on China, but it's an initiative from China in how the world can interconnect and eliminate poverty into a modern and stronger infrastructure and global economy. I'm going to just do something briefly because I think that we are facing one of the great problems here in the West and in Europe is a censorship problem. As much as they love to use the term freedom in terms of directly attacking many of the Asian countries, including China, but I think that it's important to identify at least some of the immediate parameters of Xi Jinping's address to hold high the banner of socialism with Chinese characteristics and strive to, in unity, to build a modern socialist country in all respects. He made an address which was quite long, but the immediate substance of it is the following. The 20th National Congress of the Communist Party of China is a meeting of great importance. It takes place at a critical time as the entire party and the Chinese people of all ethnic groups embark on a new journey to build China into a modern socialist country in all respects and advance towards the second centennial goal. The theme of this Congress is holding high the great banner of socialism with Chinese characteristics, fully implementing the thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era, carrying forward the great spirit, founding spirit of the party, staying confident and building strength, upholding fundamental principles and breaking new ground, forging ahead with enterprise and fortitude, and striving in unity to build a modern socialist country in all respects and advance the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation on all fronts. This was the immediate introduction. I think that this states quite positively the direction that China wishes to go in the coming decades, and in no way does this characterize or should be or could be interpreted as a threat to Western civilization. Therefore, the spirit of joining in friendship and cooperation is clearly in the interests of all people, despite the general remarks of both Sunak in Britain and President Biden, who identified not as cooperation and friendship, but rather as an intense competition. In terms of just how this censorship is being hopefully broken, at least the role of the BRICS in promoting the BRI received a kind of international recognition when the spokeswoman for the Chinese government office, Xiangming, identified a quote from me as the BRI has been the leading initiative in modern history to bring about a new global development order. I think this is the direction that we want to see brought out in various European countries to begin with, and ultimately even in the United States and worldwide, in order to identify the real parameters of what the BRI means and why it is in the interest of all nations. just bring this quote as a foundation for what I believe will be the coming spirit for the BRICS, for our BRICS, the Belt and Road Institute, but for the coming year, for 2023, which will be the 10th year in after which the initiative of the Belt and Road was launched by President Xi Jinping. And this is a statement from a very important philosophical thinker and genius that many people do know, but too few people are fundamentally aware of. But I think it defines the spirit that we want to identify. So I'm just going to read it briefly. It's not very long. This is from a quote from Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. I consider it a singular plan of the fates that human civilization and refinement should today be concentrated, as it were, in the two extremes of our continent, in Europe and in China, which adores the Orient as Europe does the opposite edge of the earth. Perhaps supreme providence has ordained such an arrangement so that as the most cultivated and distant peoples stretch out their arms to each other, those in between may gradually be brought to a better way of life. Now that's the foundation for the way the world should be thinking. We have a lot of hard work to do in order to bring that about, but I believe we can do it and will do it in the coming year. Just to identify this, that was apparently a message. I will leave it at that. I think that we have some very interesting presentations which will elaborate the kind of spirit that I think we have to go forward with in the coming year. And I wish now to introduce our first speaker, His Excellency, the Ambassador of the People's Republic of China in Sweden, Ambassador Shui. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for your brave introduction and opening remarks. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good morning. I'm honored to be invited to attend the webinar, The Outcome and Implications of the 20th National Congress of the Communist Party of China. First of all, on behalf of the Chinese Embassy, I'd like to extend my warm welcome to all the guests who join us today, and my respect to all the friends who have offered continuous care and support for the China's development. Meanwhile, I'd also like to extend my heartfelt thanks to our host, BRICS, for your elaborate preparations for this webinar. Over a month ago, the 20th National Congress of the Communist Party of China, which attracted worldwide attention, was successfully held, charting the course and drawing a blueprint for China's development for the present and the years to come. Many leaders of foreign political parties and governments worldwide have congratulated on the success of this Congress and are full of expectations for the new opportunities brought by China's new development to the world. It is in tune with both the times and the circumstances that today's webinar focuses on the outcome and the implications of the 20th National Congress of the CPC. I'd like to take this opportunity to share my thinking and perspectives, and hopefully can offer some help to our friends to better understand China the CPC, and the 20th National Congress of the CPC. This is a Congress that holds banner high and meets people's expectations. History has proved that a strong core of leadership and advanced theories that are scientifically effective are the key to the development and growth of a country. The first plenary session of the 20th CPC Central Committee elected the new central leadership with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core. This is a central leadership that is fully trusted by the 1.4 billion Chinese people. It is also a politically resolute, united, and dynamic central leadership that meets the long-term development needs of the cause of the CPC and China. On the basis of integrating the basic tenets of Marxism with China's specific realities and fine traditional culture, the Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era has opened up a new realm of adapting Marxism to the Chinese context and the needs of our times. We will fully implement and uphold it for a long time to come. We firmly believe that with General Secretary Xi Jinping continuing to steer the ship, and with the scientific guidance of Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era, we will be able to seize opportunities, overcome risks and challenges, and achieve the strategies and goals set by the 20th National Congress of the CPC. This is Congress that points out the direction and clarifies the tasks. General Secretary Xi Jinping explicitly declared in his report to the Congress that the central task of the CPC will be to lead the Chinese people of all ethnic groups in a centered effort to build China into a great modern socialist country in all respects, and to advance the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation on all fronts through a Chinese path to modernization. Chinese modernization contains elements that are common to the modernization processes of all countries, but it is more characterized by features that are unique to the Chinese context. It is the modernization of a huge population. China is working to achieve modernization for more than 1.4 billion people, a number larger than the combined population of the developed countries in the world today. This is a task of unparalleled difficulty and complexity. The modernization of China's more than 1.4 billion people will be an unprecedented event in the history of human development. It will provide the world with an extra large market and provide more opportunities for global enterprises. It is a modernization of common prosperity for all. Now that China has won the battle against the poverty and built a moderately prosperous society in all respects, we will continue to promote common prosperity for all, so that more gains of development will benefit all the people in fairer way and in every aspect of their lives, linking closely that great dream of the Chinese nation with daily lives of every family. China's efforts on common prosperity for all We also promote the common development and the progress of all countries, help the world solve the problem of unbalanced development, and promote building a human community with a shared future. It is the modernization of material and cultural ethical advancement. Over the past decade, China's share of the world economy has risen from 11.3% to 18.5%, and its per capita GDP has risen from 39,800 yuan to 81,000 yuan. China has built the world's largest education system, social security system, and healthcare system. And the average life expectancy has increased to 78.2 years. We will keep raising people's living standards and enriching their cultural and spiritual lives, so that every family will enjoy a decent life and everyone will have a strong sense of moral integrity. At the same time, we will promote human advancement along a balanced, positive, and upward trajectory by actively promoting exchanges and mutual learning among human civilizations. It is modernization of harmony between humanity and nature, in the spirit of being responsible to both itself and the world. China is committed to the theory of lucid waters, and large mountains are invaluable assets, and efforts in building a beautiful China with blue skies, green lands, and clean waters. In the past decade, China has been one of the countries with the farthest energy consumption reduction and has built the largest carbon market and clean power generation system. China has restored 34.67 million hectares of the forest from farmland in the past decade, contributing to a quarter of the world's new forest area. In the next decade, China will strive to plant another 70 billion trees. The Chinese path to modernization will inject a strong impetus into the global response to climate change and help build a cleaner and more beautiful world. It is a modernization of peaceful development. The Chinese path to modernization is not a reprint of the rise of traditional powers. Still less is it the old path that the country growing in strength invariably seeks hegemony. Instead, it is the highest path, a right path that delivers benefits to both China and the world. China is the only country in the world that has kept to the path of peaceful development in its constitution. It is the only country among the 5 nuclear weapon states that commits to no first use of nuclear weapons. It is also the second largest contributor to the UN peacekeeping budget, and largest contributor of peacekeeping troops among permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. China will always be committed to its fundamental national policy of opening to the outside world and pursue a mutually beneficial strategy of opening up. We will strive to safeguard world peace and development as we pursue our own development, and will make greater contributions to world peace and development through our own development. This is a Congress that pursues the common good of the world with global mindset. At present, the momentous changes unseen in a century continue to evolve. The pandemic still drags on. The geopolitical environment remains tense, and the crises in global finance, economy, food, and energy are intertwined with one another. The world is once again standing at the crossroads. Facing this situation, the solution given by the 20th National Congress of the CPC is to promote world peace and development, and to promote the building of human community with a shared future. We are firm in pursuing a development foreign policy of peace, adhering to the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence in promoting friendship and cooperation with other countries. We strive to create new opportunities for the world with our own development and to contribute our share to building an open global economy that delivers greater benefits to all people. We play an active part in the reform and development of the global governance system. We pursue a vision of global governance featuring shared growth through discussion and collaboration. China upholds true multilateralism, promotes greater democracy and international relations, and works to make global governance fairer and more equitable. On the journey forward, the CPC will work together with people from all countries to uphold humanity's shared values of peace, development, fairness, justice, democracy, and freedom. China will always be a builder of world peace, a contributor to global development, a defender of international order, a provider of public goods, and a mediator of hotspot issues. And will continue to promote the development of human community with a shared future and push the wheels of history towards a bright future. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the Belt and Road Initiative is an important platform for building human community with a shared future. It will continue to play an important role for the development of China and the world. Since President Xi Jinping proposed the BRI in 2013, the vision of the BRI is becoming a reality and bearing rich fruits. It has become a road of development, a road of opportunities, and a road of health for all countries. It also has been welcomed by the international community, both as a public good and a cooperation platform. China has signed over 200 BRI cooperation documents with over 170 countries and international organizations. Since 2013, China's annual trade value with BRI countries has increased from $1.04 trillion to $1.8 trillion, up by 73%. And our cumulative trade value has reached $12 trillion. Thanks to the BRI, East Africa and Cambodia now have highways. Kazakhstan is connected to the sea. Maldives has a cross-sea bridge, and Laos, the once landlocked country, is now land-linked country. The BRI has brightened the life of the people in more and more countries. The world sees it more and more clearly. that the BRI originated in China and its opportunities and benefits belong to the world. The BRI is a public road open to all. The 20th National Congress of the CPC has voted in support to promote the high-quality development of the Belt and Road Initiative, which means it is a solemn commitment made by China for promoting global development and prosperity and building a human community with a shared future. Next year will be the 10th anniversary of the BRI. President Xi Jinping has recently announced that China will consider hosting the Third Belt and Road Forum for international cooperation next year. It will inject new momentum in and broaden the prospects for global development and prosperity. Sweden is a founding member of the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. The Swedish business community has shown a strong interest and a positive attitude in promoting mutually beneficial cooperation with China under the BRI framework. Currently, both China and Sweden are actively promoting green development, which provides enormous opportunities for broader and deeper cooperation. China is willing to continue to uphold the principle of shared growth through discussion and collaboration, to work together with all sides, including Sweden, to synergize the BRI with the development strategies and regional cooperation initiatives of other countries, to realize broader and smoother interconnectivity. We are willing to evaluate our practical cooperation to a higher level, provide more opportunities for the world, inject strong momentum into international cooperation, and make greater contributions to the progress of humanity. Let me conclude by wishing this webinar great success. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ambassador Shui, for your informative and very insightful remarks. I would like to continue now by inviting the ambassador from Belarus, Ambassador Mironchik, Dmitry Mironchik. We expect great cooperation in light of the Belt and Road between China and Belarus, and Ambassador will highlight and express how this works. So thank you very much, Ambassador Mironchik.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Brower. Indeed, if we look at the map, which is right behind you, you'll see the main crossroads of the BRICS BRI in Europe is Belarus, and that's why we are first of all proud of it, but also very keen to keep the momentum, keep developing this cooperation between Belarus and China, which benefits also other members of the Belt and Road Initiative and beyond that, because this creates a very important land bridge between Asia and Europe, between China and the West. I'm sorry, I've been struggling a bit with technical problems at the beginning of the seminar, but I hope that everything stays connected while I speak. Dear Ambassador, distinguished speakers and participants of the webinar, modern means of communications and mass media made us accustomed to so-called fast news. No story, no matter how breaking, stays in the public eye for more than 3 days. One flash news report is immediately replaced by a dozen others. As a result, instead of genuinely important topics, the public discusses the change of title of a member of some royal house or the obscene antics of some would-be celebrity. We should therefore, I'm absolutely sure, thank the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden for taking the initiative and providing us with the opportunity and platform to return to the topic, the theme of the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of China and its outcomes. Indeed, the significance of the Congress extends far beyond the horizon of the typical Western media attention span. Let me quote an Australian-born philosopher, Roman Krishnarik, who wisely noted, "It is so," and I quote, "it is so startlingly clear that Western political systems have become a cause of rampant short-termism rather than a cure for it. Many politicians can barely see beyond the next election and dance to the tune of the latest opinion poll or tweet." This author is critical towards Beijing, but even so, he could not deny that China has a reputation for being a country, I quote, "incredibly successful at long-term planning." Our panelists certainly know this, but for the audience, it is worth recalling the Chinese tradition of planning. Planning not for a year or even 5 years, but for centuries. Last year, China widely celebrated the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party. In his address to the Party Congress this October, President Xi described the centenary as one of the most important events for China in the past decade. He also highlighted the entry of socialism with Chinese characteristics into a new era and the accomplishment of the historic task of intensively eliminating poverty and comprehensively building a middle-income society. It is precisely the later two objectives that were planned to be achieved by the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party, and this has been accomplished. This is the best proof that one should take Chinese plans and planning process seriously and consider them when planning one's own actions, one's own country's development strategy. What is also extremely important is that Beijing's plans are distinctly constructive and evolutionary in nature. Therefore, taking them into account by other countries will only contribute to harmonious development in the world as a whole. The goals proclaimed at the 20th Congress of the Chinese Communist Party are bold ones. It is therefore particularly important for us to know what methods the Chinese leadership intends to use to achieve them. And this is the aspect that foreign diplomats ought to pay attention to in the first place, since everything that concerns Beijing's domestic politics is the sovereign domain of the Chinese people. In the context of foreign policy, the Congress declared that China will never seek hegemony or engage in expansion, and that China is firmly committed to an independent, peaceful foreign policy. These two messages, I call them key messages, have been consistent since the beginning of the period when President Xi Jinping assumed office as the leader of the Communist Party in Chinese leadership. It is noteworthy that, however, that to describe the current political situation, President Xi for the first time used the word blackmail, making an apparent reference to the policies and practices of some Western powers. But this is arguably rather an understated characterization of the rhetoric and policies that the current hegemonic power has been pursuing towards China, including in recent weeks and months. The echoes of this campaign have even reached Sweden. I think everyone remembers how the United States brought Stockholm to refuse to cooperate with Huawei. You cannot but call it bullying and intimidation, and real friends and allies are not treated this way. That's why our Swedish colleagues tend to cancel it from their memory and never discuss it. In the wake of the Congress, in order to intimidate audiences, politicians and the media in the West have chosen the subject of one China policy and how it has been discussed during the Congress. Let me remind you that the Congress declared that the solution to the Taiwan problem is up to the Chinese people, and China will never give up the right to use force, but will seek a peaceful resolution of the issue. I repeat, a peaceful resolution of the issue. Not surprisingly, many in the Western media have emphasized in this statement the use of force, rather than the desire for a peaceful resolution, most of the time even omitting that. I'm not surprised by that. You know, I made some research in the Swedish media, and I will simply say that in the pages of the authoritative Swedish newspaper Dagens Nyheter, one finds immediately articles dedicated to the so-called wolf warrior diplomacy in relation to Chinese foreign policy. But I have never encountered there even a single reference to diplomacy, which is the term widely used in China, and which is describes principles, tools, and methods applied by the Chinese diplomatic service, and indeed China as a whole right now. I believe that it might be enriching and interesting for the audience here in Sweden to learn about diplomacy, maybe with the help of the Belt and Road Institute. I don't want to take too much space, but let me just point out one more aspect which we consider to be of importance, of significance for us: the timeline. The next milestone which the Communist Party of China is aiming at is the centenary of the People's Republic of China in 2049. By that date, Beijing aims to build a modernized socialist state, and the Chinese Communist Party is committed to continuing its struggle to turn China into a modernized socialist nation that will lead the world in terms of combined national power and international influence by the middle of this century. An important consideration for us all, although I hope to stay there also in 2049, is that there will be a halfway point between the centenary of the Communist Party in 2021 and the centenary of the People's Republic of China in 2049. And this is going to happen in 2035. The Chinese leadership can be expected to work particularly hard and use all possible tools to make meaningful progress towards the declared goal by the later date. Before 2035, there can be adjustments in tactics, but we shouldn't expect radical changes in strategy. And this is essential if we are to understand the rhythm in which China lives and build our own national strategies accordingly. This is the horizon and this is the milestone we are setting ourselves when working on such important joint projects with China as the Chinese Belarusian Industrial Park, which is the largest industrial park, Chinese industrial park outside China. When developing the connectivity projects, railroad projects between Belarus and China, helping to bring Chinese goods to the European markets and vice versa. This year, we added on additional project besides rail, which the capacity of which is used almost 100% now. We are developing land transportation possibilities. The existence and open character of Chinese development plans discussed and endorsed at the congresses of the Communist Party helps very much shape our own foreign policy and economic development goals. This is an asset. And this is an asset which I think is for everybody to use, regardless of their intentions and their desire to participate in Chinese projects, because we all know by now that you may like it or not, but you cannot ignore it. And the predominant part of the world likes these projects, is interested in these projects, and is directly involved in these projects. This forms a backbone and the grounds for the development of other nations. And this is of indeed great assistance. I think that this practice of long-term planning, this ability to concentrate resources on achieving principal goals of the countries is something we should all study and apply in our countries too. Thank you very much. And I'm eager to follow discussions at our webinar. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ambassador Mironchik. It is an honor to hear a European country that has, as you've outlined, a deeper understanding of both the Belt and Road and the spirit of what the intentions of China and the Belt and Road and its policies can mean for the world. So it's a good model that we hope your thinking will spread in Sweden, and we will work for that objective in the coming year. So thank you again. I would like now to to invite the speaker, the next speaker, from Italy, Professor Michele Geraci, who is the former Undersecretary of State of the Italian Ministry of Economic Development. Professor Geraci is also a fluent speaker of Mandarin, of Chinese. He has deep insights into living and experiencing the true nature of Chinese society and culture. And he helped to initiate the Memorandum of Understanding and the work that he was doing in the former government of Italy, which I hope perhaps he will be able to influence with the coming new government in the future, so that more European nations are working together to expand friendship and cooperation through the work of the Belt and Road. So, Professor Geraci, you are welcome. Please speak.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you to the BRICS Institute for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be with you and to give me the opportunity to share for a few minutes what I'm thinking. I want to give my greetings to the ambassadors present, both of you, and to all colleagues from academia. I will speak in English, not in Chinese, although I'm also expanding to further languages as the need arises. You're right, Stephen. I was the main proponent of Italy joining the Belt and Road. This was done in 2019. I'm a believer from what I've seen in China, for what I've seen in Japan, in Korea, and what I have not seen in India, what I have seen maybe in Kenya, and in France, but not in Italy, is that the development of transport infrastructure is one of the key pillars of social and economic development. This allows mobility of people. This allows to manage the migration that could be from rural to urban. This allows efficiency of how the society is run. I give you one example. In Italy, we have, maybe you are familiar with, frequent train delays. I have accumulated the train delays in Europe and also Germany. Not so good either. I've accumulated more delays in a few months traveling around trains in Europe than in 12 years in China. This creates inefficiency because we do know that people, to make a very simple example, they need to go to the railway station earlier to wait for the train in case they miss the connection. So a lot of time is spent waiting on the platform. So this is a micro example, and I've done the macro example of migration. So I do believe that the transport is a key pillar of economic development. And that's why I thought that Italy joining the BRI project, cooperating with China and with all the other countries, could have brought prosperity not just to my own country, but also to the other countries involved along the route and in the rest of Africa, which, by the way, is something that Europe needs to address because we have a growing migrant crisis that could be also getting worse because of food supply from Ukraine and Russia. And therefore, we need to look at how countries like Egypt, Rwanda, that rely a lot on wheat coming from those two countries will react. So it is almost no-brainer for me that cooperating on developing infrastructure gives the potential of economic and social stability to developing countries. This was, of course, criticized, but let's say this is the past. Looking forward, I do think that the current government is taking a more practical approach, and I'm trying to do my best with daily WhatsApp to relevant people to make sure that they understand that we can be at the same time part of the NATO alliance that has never been put into discussion, and yet do business with China. This is not in any way contradictory. The US, which of course is the pillar of the NATO, wants to do more business with China. And so it is almost funny that the Belt and Road or countries that want to do business with China are in a way accused of wanting to shift the geopolitical and step out of the NATO, of the Western alliance, while it is indeed the US that wants to do exactly the same thing with the Phase 1 agreement and other agreement that kind of even force or push China to buy more made in USA product, which is the Phase 1 agreement is a much more tight agreement than a framework MOU that we do sign with China that has no specific project. So if the United States can have a phase one agreement, getting China to buy more US goods, and the US is the NATO, why cannot European countries do a softer agreement and yet be part of the NATO? We are in Italy an export-driven country. We want the world to be prosperous. We want Russia to have a strong economy. We do not want our clients to have economic difficulties, because these will face and feed back into our own economy. We do want China to be prosperous. We don't want to contain China growth. We want China to be growing. We want to sell our fashion, food, machinery, chemical product, high technology products to countries around the world. Within the framework, of course, of avoiding the dual usage and the military, the usual limitation, that's fine. We do not sell warplanes to China, and that is perfectly acceptable. So the development of infrastructure that is in, by the way, not just in Italy and China or in other countries like in Africa, is also, in my view, a non-sensitive topic that should not raise concerns amongst the NATO geopolitical allies. I'm very happy that both the Italian government is reconsidering or is looking at it, how to best interact with China. But the very good news that we have had is the visit of Chancellor Scholz to China. The continuous discussion between President Macron and President Xi Jinping, and even the visit of head of the European Council, Michele, soon on December 1st to China, because this means that Biden has met with Xi Jinping, Scholz has gone to China, the European Commission goes to China. I think this is a very good sign, because it provides a cover to countries that are kind of not 100% convinced yet, or that they fear that being geopolitically weaker, they cannot do the first step. The fact that Germany does go first, it provides a political cover to all other countries, so that, if Scholz can go to China and meet with President Xi, of course, my Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni can do it, and indeed that's what she said. She accepted an invitation by President Xi Jinping to go to China next year, and so this is very good news. In a way, when we have a bit of a geopolitical tension, so we kind of always need a leader that does, by leader I mean someone that leads, someone that does take the first step in kind of breaking the impasse and getting back to business. So I'm glad that again Chancellor Scholz won his own internal battle with Annalena Baerbock from the Green Party, who is notoriously more cold towards doing business with China, for a reason that I don't understand, because her being from the Green Party needs to also understand that the green evolution in the European Union cannot be done without cooperation with China, that has the largest production of solar panels, wind farms, and also leading also on the usage of energy with electric vehicles. So I'm glad that there is this apparent contradiction, the criticism on the Belt and Road, the new Green Deal in European Union is gaining a little bit of momentum, and this brings back to real politics, because in this time of also geopolitical tensions within Europe also, we need to bring trade back at the center, because with trade, we have communication between people, we have communication between companies, people get to know each other, they understand that there are no monsters around, they are just other people that do the same thing that we do around the world. They wake up in the morning and they want to make some money so that they can send their children to school and buy food for their wives and husbands. And so that's why, as a professor, I put both hats, half a politician, half academic. I think we also have a responsibility to increase this exchange of knowledge, students, professors, culture, music, literature. God forbid if we stop reading, like in Europe we are trying, or we have tried to do, to stop to read writers, for example, from Russia, just because they happen to be Russian. This is, in my view, completely crazy, and working towards war, not towards peace. So the Belt and Road for me is an agent of peace. I use a slogan. I never do slogans, but this I like it because it's mine. It's better the Silk Road than the tank road. So I think where we trade goods, we don't trade weapons. And I think we're talking about China here, but I'm also reaching out to our friends in Russia. And of course, we have the Belarusian friends here, that we really are part, not just of Europe, but part of the world. And we really need to work together to bring peace to people and serenity to daily lives. Thank you very much. Can I hear you, Stephen?
Yeah. I apologize. I don't know why the picture on the video was moved away from you as the speaker to me and the center screen. I don't know if my colleague was doing that or how that occurred.
No, that appears only on your side, but for the rest, it's okay.
Okay, all right. The main thing I would like to thank you for your perceptive remarks on the role of the Belt and Road as a vehicle for peace. And I think this message will eventually resonate. We will have a lot of hard work to do this coming year, but when we work together, I think we can bring about, hard work brings good results. So thank you very much, Professor Geraci. And I understand you might not be able to stay with us for the entire webinar, unfortunately, but it's a great honor to have you here with us. And I certainly hope we will have you again in the coming year to participate and join us in the future.
With pleasure, thank you. Yes, I can hang on for another few minutes, and then at 11 I need to run to another place here in lovely Rome, which, by the way, I welcome you all to come here at the next opportunity. Maybe, Stephen, we should have the next event physically in Rome, inviting you all down here.
That would be wonderful. A good way to expand the objective of not only the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, but the Belt and Road Institute in Europe, which will be a great step forward for bringing Europe to a proper orientation. Okay, I would like to now introduce the next speaker, Professor Xing, Professor of Politics and Society at the Aalborg University in Denmark. He will outline some of his insights into the Belt and Road Initiative in light of, as you see, of the US-China rivalry, and how we can work to make that, instead of a rivalry, a friendship, which hopefully will be a result of our work. So thank you very much, Professor Li. We don't hear you though. You have to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
And also the screen.
Yeah, the screen
Okay.
we see. The screen
Okay,
is seen.
First of all, I would like to thank Stefan and Hussein from the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. It is my pleasure to speak to this seminar. And I regard myself as academic, a bit different from the previous speakers. And I do not need to talk more about Belt and Road and Party Congress, because His Excellency Ambassador Cui has already introduced Belt and Road in depth and in substance. And also Professor Michele Geraci and also expressed very well about the significance of Belt and Road and its connection with Europe. And I am professor in international political economy, international relations, and I would say I think let me use the pen. In 2018, I published a volume on Belt and Road Institute on China's Belt and Road initiative, and it has received quite good publicity and quite a lot of downloads. This book. So as academic, I try to provide a broad theoretical and conceptual understanding about the Belt and Road and about the current situation where Belt and Road is situated, which is China-US rivalry. So right now we are witnessing a kind of a mix of world order transformations. We have a world disorder, a lot of disorders, including the war in Europe. We need a new world order, which is not happening. And we really wish that the current world order can have some kind of reorganization to include emerging powers, but that is not happening. The United States is refusing to do that. At the same time, we are witnessing a lot of world disorder and crisis. I'm just listing here. I'm not going to go through it. And also the rise of China and the BRICS also giving a lot of pressures on the existing order, and also the rest of the world, the rest countries of the world are adjusting themselves to the changing world order and the rise of China. And in Europe and the whole world, we are facing a divided world. If you look at the condemnation against Russia, United Nations is 141 countries condemned, but why, my question is, only 46 countries sanction Russia? According to the new data from the Center for Future of Democracy, Cambridge University, shows clear division of the world, okay? Among the global north, okay? If you look at the global north, 1.2 billion population, they have a negative view over China, 72%, a negative view over Russia, 87%. But the data is almost the reverse. If we talk about global south, 6.3 billion population, they have a positive attitude towards China, 70%, and even 66% over Russia. So we can see the world is divided. And I want to echo Stefan's word, whether in Europe, we also have a censorship. We do not really tell our people what is happening outside the world. This is what I want to quote what recently Indian foreign minister, he said, Europe has grown out of the mindset that its problems are world problems and the rest problems are not European problems. Because I came to Europe before the end of the Cold War, I witnessed the feeling of triumphalism in Europe, the great confidence in Europe, but now I see the confidence is declining. During the Cold War, we have a bipolar. Then we moved to a unipolar, very short, US-based unipolar, and now we are in multipolar. This is what the textbooks says. This is what we always say, okay? And if we combine what I just mentioned about there is a kind of overlapping changing characteristics in three different but overlapping ways, reorder, new order, and disorder, then my research question is, my own question I pose to the rest of all panelists and also audience, is that whether the world is moving towards a multi-order world. Okay, multi-order world, this is the new concept. And this is also a project, a research project, which we have received funding by 3 professors, okay, 1 from UK and 2 from Denmark. And this idea of multi-order world shows that if US-China decoupling, economic technological decoupling is further deteriorating, and if Europe and Russia is also decoupling economically, and in terms of security and politically, then we are moving towards a multi-order world. Okay, if we talk of multi-order world, then China definitely will represent one order, and many people theorize that BRI, Belt and Road, will be the driving force, and the China-led connectivity will be the symbol of China-led order. Okay, but what is Europe's choice? I'm going to ask the question at the end of my presentation. Okay, so we are in our current age is age of global political economy. Okay, which means that both structure and agency, which means actor. Okay, structure, the world economic structure with division of labor, production chain, supply chain, value chain, global finance, and resource and raw material, they are totally intertwined and decentralized. Okay, this is the structure. Okay, then we have actors. Used to be the state as the main actor, but not now anymore. We have transnational companies, we have transnational actors and transnational political forces. So now we are in the age where both global structure and global agencies are changing. Look at China's BRI. If we try to understand China's Belt and Road, then you can see that the Party Congress will further enhance BRI and further push the BRI to be integrated with world economic structure. So all these China's achievements, I don't need to repeat them because Ambassador Cui has already introduced Chinese progress. If we put Chinese progress, if we inject Chinese progress into the world economic structure, and the BRI will further enhance China's integration with global division of labor, production chain, supply chain, value chain, etc., etc. And Europe, Asia, Latin America, and Africa, and the rest of the world will be part of this. And now, US is worried as an agency. US is worried. So now US and China is in a very hot rivalry situation. US and China are in a rivalry and competitive relationship today. And you can see that Quad, okay, security dialogue, and also Indo-Pacific strategy. And now US wants to set up Indo-Pacific economic framework to compete China's Belt and Road. But I would argue that the US concern is much more security rather than economic development. This is my analysis and interpretation. And because of the Belt and Road and its success, now we are witnessing the rise of global competitions into economic structures. Okay, we have a Belt and Road already. Then we have a European Union's global gateway. Okay, United States, Blue Dot Network, G7's Build Back Better World, and Japan's infrastructure investments, Russia's Eurasia. Okay, then we have the South-North Transport Corridor by Russia, Iran, and India. So we can see the competition now. Okay, which is good, I think, which is good. Okay, World Bank has a study on a Belt and Road, and the World Bank conclusion is that if World Bank has got global support and it can be implemented smoothly and successfully, it will increase both the world, the Belt and Road countries' living standard income and even the whole world. So this is a study by the World Bank. Okay, I want to echo Stefan's in the beginning his remark on whether in Europe we have censorship. We do not want our people to know what is happening. I myself live in Denmark. I do not see a lot of news on what is happening about outside world in Denmark. Honestly, I do not see the TV, the radio, and now I will try to tell you what is happening in Southeast Asia. You have railway stations are connecting in many parts of our Southeast Asia. You have Indonesia, You have the Lao Railway, okay, the high-speed train, okay. Now there is a plan from Chinese Kunming all the way to Singapore, okay. And Vietnam is going to also implement a Chinese railway standards. Burma and many other, Cambodia, they will be part of the train network. Now Africa too. Ambassador Cui also mentioned about Chinese railway project in Africa. So Belt Road and connectivity is the icon, is the prosperity of East Asia, Africa, and many parts of the world. In Europe, do we know that actually the Eurasia train is one of the most important transportation means today in Europe? Because of the war, because of sanctions, that we have a limited airspace transportation now. The train now is playing the most important role today, okay? And also because of the coronavirus situation, we have there are trains from China to London and to Madrid, okay? And you can see the recent years, in the last couple of years, is 11 to 12% increase every year. And it is operating 1,000 trains per month for 27 consecutive months. You can see the demand for the train network is getting higher and higher. So connectivity, Belt Road connectivity in Europe is playing a big role. Do we know that? Do European citizens know this? I'm not sure. So Europe is now standing on the two boats. It's standing in two boats. On the one side, it has security connection with the United States. It needs the United States in terms of security. But on the other side, they also have a great economic cooperation with China. It needs China as well. So now Europe is in kind of standing in two boats. Okay, but according to a research that most European countries wants to have keep the traditional security connections with the United States. At the same time, every country wants to strengthen its economic cooperation with China. But whether Europe is able to implement its value politics, value-based foreign policy, I am very doubtful. If we look at European Union's China policy, it's not very consistent. It's not very consistent. On China, we do not see a united Europe. On China, I see at least a divided Europe on almost on every issues. On economic issues, okay, we had a very great success on comprehensive economic investment, but because of the very politics, because of Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and this investment treaty was paused, was suspended. Human rights always become a kind of a blockade in a lot of corporations. Bad Road, and also that these Eastern Europe and the Balkan countries are under pressure. And also, if you look at Huawei, Professor Geraci also mentioned Huawei. Some countries use Huawei, some countries not use Huawei, some countries are doubtful about Huawei. So Huawei become also a divided line in Europe too. So on Europe, on China, we do not have a united Europe. We have a divided Europe. So Europe choice. Now I'm asking because Europe choice. Okay. I have seen a lot of research, research reports regarding that what Europe is going to do if China-US is in a conflict situation. And one institute says if Germany, the two German institutions said if Germany sides on the US side and starts economic sanctions against China, Germany will lose 6 times as much as Brexit, which Great Britain has lost. Another institute's conclusion is that there is no way that Europe is going to be successful in sanction against China if that situation came, okay? Because China's dominance in global supply chain and value chain, and also global South, they will not follow the European suit or the Anglo-Saxon suit at all. Okay, and China is going to further develop in order to isolate itself against any Western sanctions. China is going to be more and more independent, so which is not good for Europe at all. And don't forget, according to Forbes, that while in the West we're talking about the delinking, decoupling, the rest of Asia, even Africa, they are more and more integrated with China. So the situation in Europe and in Asia is totally different. We must understand this. European leaders, they understand it, actually. If you look at Macron's speech to French ambassador conference in 2019, and also former Chancellor Merkel's speech to the World Economic Forum, they all understand it. Macron will talk about the decline of Western hegemony, and Chancellor Merkel, she talked about why China is setting up alternative institutions is because we, the West, especially the United States, we are refused to adopt institutional reforms. Don't forget, China is Europe's largest trading partner, and also Professor Geraci talk about Chancellor Schu's visit to China and German company. Don't forget, more than 50% of German companies in China, their market share is more than 35%. It's huge profit. And that is why that the Dutch company, which make chips machines, they refuse to cooperate with the United States because the loss of Chinese market is huge. So now I come back to my last point, is that I return to my research question. If that US-China rivalry, if Europe follow United States suits on the US side, whether the world is going to moving towards a multi-world order. I believe Europeans are rational. I believe it. Okay, I'm not sure, and I hope that we will have a better world, even if that we were moving towards a multi-order world, but we still can cooperate. But I hope that we will have a real world order. Okay, it's here. We hope the real world order will be the dominant spirit. Thank you, Better World Institute. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Hussein, and thank everybody's attention.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Professor Li, for a very informative and thought-provoking presentation. I hope people will think about it. I think we have a very interesting foundation in this webinar. We've had a speaker from Europe first, the Ambassador Mironchik, promoting positive cooperation. We've had a speaker from Italy promoting positive cooperation. Now we have just heard from Professor Li from Denmark. We still have Norway and Sweden to hear from, and the next speaker will actually is from Norway, Professor Diesen, who will be our next speaker. He is the professor at the University of Southeastern Norway. He is quite active in doing many interviews and research on the possibilities of overcoming the geopolitical divisions that Professor Li was identifying. So I welcome you, Professor Diesen, to speak for a Norwegian faction that will defend cooperation. And I think we keep building on European nations that will join in our efforts. So thank you. You're welcome to speak.
Thank you. And also thank you for the invitation. I hope I agree very much with what Professor Li just spoke. So I just hope I won't be too repetitive. But yes, I would like to focus today primarily on the National People's Congress of China's reference to this global security initiative, because I thought this was is quite interesting because economic development and security and politics, they're unavoidably connected. So as we see this huge shift of economic power towards the east, of course, China being at this, leading in this development, we have to accept that there's a different world in terms of the distribution of wealth. And for that reason, it also influences or challenges this world order, which was attempted to be established after the Cold War. And in my opinion, I think it's in everyone's interest to seriously address this proposal by China, this global security initiative, and also to scrutinize a bit the criticism that has been levied against it. And again, I think for the Belt and Road Initiative to be a vehicle for peace, it's also important not just to get the economic connectivity, but also then look at some of this security initiative around it. Because when when China brought forward this global security initiative, part of its complaints seem to be, well, a recurring theme is how the Cold War mentality has been maintained after the Cold War. And indeed, a lot of our institutions remained, which reproduced some of the logic of the Cold War. Some of the problem has also been security through the struggle for hegemony instead of focusing on the sovereign state. And also serving bloc politics and alliances is also something that has a tendency to create dividing lines and present everything in a zero-sum logic. And it's worth noting that a lot of these Chinese-led initiatives for international institutions, be it the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or BRICS, I wouldn't put them in the same categories as alliances because alliances tend to be country A and B allied against country C. But what we see in a lot of these Chinese-led institutions, again, from SCO to BRICS, you find countries which wouldn't work against country C. If you have China, India, Pakistan, all of this together, what you often see is countries seeking security with each other, with other member states, instead of member states seeking security against a non-member. So I think that this is quite important, but this also is important to then recognize some of the criticism of, for example, the Quad, which becomes or is often envisioned as kind of like an Asian NATO against China. And it's worth reconsidering then whether or not NATO has been such a great tool for stability in Europe if you really want to replicate the same in Asia. And I think that Chinese has an interesting alternative. And so I think this is a positive proposal for the world and especially relevant for us in Europe. But it's also worth noticing or addressing then Americans' opposition, because the US State Department referred to China's global security initiative as China parroting Russia. And they said they might as well have heard this coming from the Kremlin. And they referenced the concept of indivisible security as especially something that sounds like something the Russians would say, which is intended to delegitimize it. But again, I think it's worth exploring what happened to indivisible security and the reason why we should bring this back as a core concept in global security. So again, like Professor Lee pointed out, I think that a key challenge now is that we're transferring from a unipolar system to a multipolar. And I think that the Global Security Initiative of China really provides a solution towards this challenge. But this also explains why there tends to be some opposition from the United States, as of course the US would be the center of the unipolar order, which has already faded away. But again, what explains the US opposition and to the principles of having no military blocs, sovereignty in accordance with international law as stipulated by the UN Charter, and the concept of indivisible security? Again, indivisible security simply meaning the security of one state can't be divorced from the security of another. So, in other words, if you undermine the security of China, that will impact the security of the United States as well. So, I think in recent development, given that pan-European security has collapsed, I think it's worth looking at the European case first, because this kind of becomes the canary in the coal mine of this global security initiative, because this is a good case study for how indivisible security has been abandoned, and we see that the European security order has collapsed. And I think that what we've seen happen in Europe, it risks happening to the whole world now, given that we don't have a security architecture that facilitates or reflects common realities. That is the current international distribution of power. Just if we take a brief look at Europe, we can see that we risk the same things across the world. So in 1989, when the Cold War was negotiated to an end between Gorbachev and Bush in Malta, it was argued then in December of 1989 that the Cold War was over and we had to create a new Europe, a pan-European security architecture. And the following year, we signed the Charter of Paris for a new Europe in 1990. And again, some of the key principles we had was we should no longer have dividing lines in Europe. We should have sovereign equality, so equal sovereignty for everyone, and indivisible security. So one side should not expand its security at the expense of others. Now, this sounds very familiar and similar to some of the key ideas behind China's global security initiative. Indeed, in 1994, we built on these principles from the Charter of Paris for a new Europe and to form a new European security organization. This was the OSCE in 1994, again, repeating the same principles. So no dividing lines, sovereign equality, and indivisible security. That this should be the foundation for European security. Again, much like China's now saying these similar ideas should be the principle for global security initiatives. But this system didn't last in Europe, and the key problem was effectively that Russia was weak, as even American officials recognized. So, according to William Perry, he was defense minister, or he was arguing that his colleagues essentially said, well, who cares what the Russians think? They're weak, we don't have to listen to them. And a third-rate power. So the US developed a parallel security architecture based on unipolarity and hegemony. And this then entailed a rejection of the whole idea of pan-European security agreements made based on indivisible security. Now, we could argue that this had some good intentions. Especially in Europe, many believe that the Americans were providing a format for a benign hegemony. That is, they wanted to elevate the liberal values of democracy and human rights on a global scale. So it made more sense to organize security under hegemony instead of having sovereign equality and indivisible security. However, the problem was, irrespective of any benign intentions of these values, the values were always linked to a hegemon. So in other words, if you want the hegemons to survive, the hegemony has to be preserved. And so this had an effect of corrupting a lot of our values and effectively making them almost window dressing for what became imperial policies. So this is not an anti-human rights argument. I'm saying that human rights would have survived better if it was not linked to the idea of a liberal hegemony, a hegemonic rule. So we can argue that, like, how did indivisible security, how was it dismantled, and how did pan-European security collapse? Well, once NATO began to expand, and again, the lessons are important because we see now the efforts of developing a Quad in Asia against China, we saw that all of these principles of pan-European security was abandoned. So instead of removing dividing lines in Europe, we simply gradually pushed the dividing lines eastwards, closer and closer to Russian borders. Instead of having sovereign equality, we wanted sovereign inequality. That meant, for example, the West, we can interfere in domestic affairs of other countries because it's democracy promotion. We can topple governments because it's democratic revolutions, and we can invade other countries because it's humanitarian interventions. However, this is our rights, but it's not the rights of others. Of course, Russia and China are not allowed to interfere or do any of these things because, again, this was the prerogative of the West. So again, you have a system based on sovereign inequality, sovereignty for us, not for you. And lastly, the principle of indivisible security. Well, this also collapsed because, as we saw, NATO expanded its security, and this undermined the security of Russia. we now see some of the consequence of this. So the idea of replicating this model in Asia with the Quad, it seems quite dangerous, and it's therefore worth exploring what China is proposing instead, which is a system of indivisible security. And because the logic of a new Cold War was therefore reproduced, and economic connectivity in Europe has obviously collapsed for the same reason. If you're going to have a militarized dividing lines in Europe, you're not going to have a prosperous Europe anymore. So the divided Europe was always destined to become economically weak, economically disconnected, and we obviously see this now. But it's also worth seeing what happened to international law, because after World War II, with the UN Charter, international law was based on mutual constraints. Every side should be constrained. It has to be based on sovereignty and sovereign equality. Now, what happened after the Cold War was in 1999, actually less than 2 weeks after NATO first expanded, NATO attacked Yugoslavia, thereby ending its period as a defensive alliance. And what was interesting at this time was it was argued that the invasion of Yugoslavia, while it was not legal, it was legitimate. And the reason why it was legitimate was it was allegedly in support of liberal values. So, the Russian and Chinese vetoes at UN could be ignored because, well, they weren't seen as having the same commitment to liberal values as NATO. So this essentially was a very dangerous precedent, because now we decoupled legality from legitimacy, and legitimacy was rooted in liberalism, and this was linked to the Western hegemony. So this also then fueled the principle of sovereign inequality. That is, democracy promotion, coups, invasions, all of this being under the guise of liberal values. Again, one can envision that we could have pulled it off in the 90s when all the power was concentrated in the West, but obviously this is no longer the case. Now, what was interesting in 2003, after the Americans invaded Iraq, they began to debate the legitimacy problem. Like the world did not see this as legitimate. So you saw a lot of scholars, as well as American politicians, discussing this. How can we develop an international system that grants the US the legitimacy to effectively do what they did in Iraq, to invade? So this is when they began to discuss this legitimacy issue again. So they proposed, how about an alliance of democracy? Let's create a league of democracies. Let's create a concert of democracies. All of this had the same logic, that democracies should not have constraints. Yes, the rest of the world should have constraints by international law, but not the liberal democracies under US leadership. And this was really how you created legitimacy for liberal hegemony. And after all of this, you saw it becoming now what we talk about today is the international rules-based order. And this is just like the concept of democracies. It has the same function, the same logic. Now, the international rules-based order sounds like international law, but it's not. The argument is often that it's international law plus humanitarian law, but this is also not correct, because humanitarian law still falls under international law. And but instead, we see international humanitarian law becoming an instrument for the liberal hegemony to exempt itself from international law. And the problem is, while we call it an international rules-based order, there's no actual rules. So if you look at specific issues, be it a key problem in international law, which is the conflict between territorial integrity or self-determination. These are two competing principles. Well, we saw in Kosovo that we decided, well, the West decided, well, now we're going to go with self-determination. So Yugoslavia and then Serbia are not allowed to keep their territory. And also when we discussed Iraq and Syria, how we're going to solve these problems, we spoke very openly about dismembering these countries as well. However, when it came to Crimea, then we decided differently. Then territorial integrity was the most important aspect. And of course, the same problem then comes with Taiwan. As the United States tends to support the separatists there, then they say, well, self-determination have to trump territorial integrity. This is the argument which gets louder. So this is the rules-based international order. It's no specific rules. You just developed competing principles, and which principle you pick always, and I mean always, aligns with geopolitical interests. So this is effectively the new system then, which pictures itself under US leadership. So and we see this now shaping all the rhetoric. So again, we speak about democracy, but when we hear it out of Washington, for example, it's always divisive. It's never in a positive framing. So we talk about dividing the world into two camps. We have liberal democracies versus authoritarian states. And the logic is that we'll finally have peace once the liberal democracies are able to weaken or eventually crush the authoritarian states. Well, this is, this is a problem for many reasons. First of all, the former, that is the liberal democracies, should not have any common rules with the latter. So the two problems that then occur is, well, first of all, heuristically, it makes no sense to divide the world into these two camps of liberal democracies and authoritarians. This is it's not completely binary, and also this is not what drives the policies of countries. It's artificially recreating Cold War dividing lines. And second of all, by rejecting the idea we should have common rules, we end up dismantling world order, and international law disappears, and we'll have full chaos. Again, what we see in Europe can very easily happen in Asia as well. So again, this has been the problem, because we don't have the unipolar era anymore. Hegemons die, overextend themselves as power is transferred from, or resources transferred from the core to the periphery. And also we see that the legitimacy of such empires tend to die. I mean, in the 90s, the US had a lot of legitimacy if you were ruling the world on its own. Today, this is more or less gone. So again, I wouldn't consider this to be an anti-American argument. I'm simply arguing that the era of hegemony is over, and it's therefore the interest of abandoning this so-called international rules-based order, which based as the hegemonic foundation and legitimacy is now gone. And I think that the United States also has an interest in a stable order, and that stability needs to reflect the realities of the current international system. Again, when you see the news of the day, fighting the Russians, using Ukraine, or promoting secessionists in Taiwan to weaken China, bombing Iran, this will not work. And one shouldn't even want it to work. This is just a recipe for disaster. So I think that this is the problem, that in Europe we maintain the bloc politics, we militarize dividing lines. Now the security architecture collapsed, and we're not allowed to discuss how this happened or how to get out, because that's a betrayal of democracy, we're told. And this is now a model which we're now beginning to push on Asia. So from this perspective, I really think that this global security initiative deserves another look, because the principle of indivisible security really has to be the foundation of any world order which can accommodate this multipolarity. Because what's really the alternative? I mean, over the past 30 years, we replaced the principle of indivisible security, and we replaced it with the new principle that freedom and stability derives from the freedom to join military alliances. So everyone should join the military alliance they want, and no one should complain. But this was never really an authentic, genuine argument, because it meant you should have the freedom to join NATO, the freedom to join Quad and other US-led alliances. But as soon as it appeared that China might even have security cooperation with the Solomon Islands, in the Australian media, it started writing articles about should we invade the Solomon Islands? And obviously, one can always speculate what would happen if Russia and China would set up a military alliance with Mexico. Well, obviously, this principle, the freedom to join military alliance, would no longer be the cornerstone of international security. Rather, we would hear about indivisible security. If you go into Mexico, it will undermine American security. This has been common sense for ages, but not for the past 30 years. So my argument is therefore that simply that, to summarize, that Europe is suffering greatly now because of this conflict with Russia, which was a very unavoidable conflict, and now risk a similar crisis with China. And this crisis can really bury Europe, given that the economic crisis on its own with Russia is now creating huge problems in Europe. And that's also why I agree with Professor Lee, arguing that Europe kind of has a foot in two boats. And actually last year I published a book called this. The title was Europe as the Western Peninsula of Greater Eurasia, arguing that Europe now belongs effectively into two regions. They're part of the transatlantic region with the United States, but they're also part now of this greater Eurasian region, where essentially, well, China's probably the leading country in terms of developing economic connectivity. And the prosperity of Europe means that we should be able to harmonize both. We should remain good, close partners with Americans, but also not at the expense of our economic partnership with the East. And this is what has to be, this economic connectivity really has to be reflected in a global security initiative. And that's why I think really that we have to take a more serious discussion about what China has proposed with this global security initiative. As this reflects the power distribution, it has the potential for legitimacy, and it also gives us this opportunity to transition peacefully from a hegemonic unipolar area, which is already gone, to the multipolar international order, which has already arrived. And yes, with that, I'll stop talking, as I might have gone over my time. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Professor Diesen. The theme you raised is extremely relevant and very important, that in this sense, the proposal for a global security initiative is an integral part of joining with the Belt and Road. The idea that human rights is used as if the West and the United States and Britain have a monopoly to decide what they think human rights are. They also believe that they have a monopoly to decide what security is. This is nonsense, and it should not continue. And I say that both as an American citizen and as a European citizen. So I thank you very much for your input. I want to welcome Professor Chen. I'm very happy to see you. I'm understanding it's very early for you, so we understand your late arrival, but we're grateful that you will be speaking with us, and will elaborate on the proposal of how the Belt and Road is a dynamic reality. And I think this webinar is showing a very dynamic discussion. I'm very grateful for everyone's participation, even for those who could not stay. I think Professor Diesen will have to leave approximately sometime before 12, as Professor Geraci had to leave. But I would like now to give the word to Professor Chen. And thank you so much for joining us.
Well, a very early good morning to everyone. I hope I'm awake enough to contribute something that might complement the other panelists who probably have spoken, more or less from a nation state or state-centric interstate perspective. Sorry, I've missed most of the earlier presentations. What I like to do, if I can bring up my PowerPoint. Hope everyone can see it. So my topic is from a different regional scale, even though I will make references to the 20th Party Congress, but I'll go much further back to look at a set of more, I would say, bottom-up, middle range, regionalizing dynamics that obviously have include the Belt and Road Initiative, but going beyond and bring it up to date, with a connection to the most recent development strategy of due circulation that has also been re-emphasized, highlighted by the Congress. If I can start by giving a little bit of intellectual backdrop to my presentation. And here's a recent book that challenges the prevailing globalization narrative by arguing, in fact, the international economy has become more regionalized than globalized in recent years. And the author, O'Neill, based this argument mostly by looking at what she calls 3 regional hubs: North America, the EU, and Asia. By looking at the traditional measure of trade to GDP ratio. And she found that the EU, of course, is more regionalized because slightly over 60% of the trade is within the EU member countries. Where in Asia, it's a little over 50%, where North America lags behind at around 40%. But a couple years ago, I wrote a little book about the BRI, arguing that there's a different kind of regionalization that has been unleashed by the Belt and Road Initiative. And if you look at the framework, I centralized or relocated the source of regionalization, from deep inside China, and looking at its extended and transnational impacts on what I call 3 master processes of globalization, urbanization, and economic development. But today, I'd like to follow that up by making a central point. I argue that the Party Congress and also next year, the 10th year anniversary of the BRI, in combination, really give us a vantage point to reassess China's growing, and I would argue enhanced role in reshaping global regionalization. And this process happening, unfolding both cumulatively from the past, as China's domestic transformation have been reconfigured, and also interactively. And if you look at these 4 scales or layers of regionalization, I'll go through each one of them in a framework, and also showing some supporting evidence to make the argument and also complement what others might have said about the geopolitical dynamics that are mostly driven by national interest and state policies. So if you look at the domestic transformation, I argue that you can go back to the 1980s and to look at what I would call 2 geographical terms. In other words, the coastal-oriented, export-oriented industrialization, I would say, for that really intensified, in the 80s and 90s, that produced the economic miracle of China early on, but also obviously produced domestic uneven development. And then from the late 90s, around 2000, of course, the Western development campaign, or go West or go global. And then the second level of regionalization, I would argue, stems from that and has been intensified and strengthened since the Belt and Road Initiative was announced. So in other words, this is the cross-border extension from China's domestic transformation into China's geographic neighborhood, or in terms of international relations scholars, this will be China's near neighborhood. And then, of course, the China-Europe freight train has fostered a long-distance regional connectivities to Europe. And then lastly, I would argue most recently is the looping back of the China-Europe connection back to China's geographic approximate region. So here's a way of thinking about these four layers of regionalization or regionalism that's in the process of developing. And obviously they are interconnected, but there's a sequential process here from 1, 2, 3, and then now we're talking about 4. So if you look at, again, the first, the origin, right, of this layered multi-scale regionalization, you can really thinking about the drivers behind the first turn to China's eastern seaboard, the coastal cities, starting obviously from Shenzhen, SEZ, open cities, and then the strong integration with the East Asian economic powers, Japan, Korea, the four tigers that produce a shift, of resources, factors of production, migration, raw materials, from China's interior to allow the coastal cities to produce efficient returns on investment. But then if you look at the second term at the bottom of the table, that we see a reversal of redirected state investment, mostly targeting infrastructure, extending some of the special policies that originally only granted to the coastal cities, to the much larger swath of China's interior and the far northwestern border regions, and also the southwestern region bordering Southeast Asia. Of course, the second turn connects now to what we're seeing is the further going west through Central Asia and then to Europe. Okay. Now, if you look at within China, right, we were thinking about how the first turn, the first layer of regionalization now connecting to the third and the fourth, that we see, of course, the western regions of China has been differentially targeted, for doing a different kind of geographical task, so to speak, to link to different segments of the BRI. And I think this is the most crucial way or chart that we should be thinking about. This is very detailed, but really, I think this zone 2 of the central western region of China that I have divided into 3 subregions. So if you look at 2A, B, and C, what you see really is 3 sets of cities, 3 sets of key cities that really have emerged, or in some ways re-emerged, like Xi'an, the ancient Silk Road eastern anchor, has been unleashed again, to serve as the starting point, for sending freight trains to Central Asia and to Europe. And here I would focus, of course, on zone 3A, which is very crucial. This is sort of the middle segment of the Eurasia between China and Europe that connect China to Europe. Particularly, I'll speak a little bit more about Kazakhstan, its special important role. And finally, I think if we look at the European side, the European end of Eurasia, again, we see a growing number of cities that have become important hubs of the Eurasia infrastructure freight train networks. And then the 4A subzone ultimately leads to what I see as emerging as the looping back, Europe, Central Asia, back through China to Southeast Asia, through the land and sea multimodal transportation corridors. Now, about China's neighborhood, I'd like to talk a little bit about China, Central Asia, and then China, Southeast Asia. So if you look at the geographic location, right, Kazakhstan, obviously it is critical. It's smack in the middle, between China and Europe. And then recently we're seeing, of course, there's been lots of drive and lots of momentum from the Chinese side. And more recently, we've seen the Kazakh government have upgraded, improved, energized, their efforts to build the border rail stations opposing Horgos and Alashanko or Alato Pass. And so this is very significant, mostly has been stimulated by the recent SCO conference in Samarkand. And then of course, you look at the bottom, you see, again, this is the planned China, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan railway, whose feasibility study has already started and will be completed sometime next year, and then construction to follow from that. And then if you look at the lines, you know, the connecting nodes, you know, I've been to both ends of this railroad and also both ends of the China-Kazakh freight stations. So now it's really encouraging to see that this remote, somewhat remote, marginalized areas with smaller cities will be connected, driven by logistics-led development. Now, of course, from Central Asia to Southeast Asia, we have seen a lot more established and developed advanced stages of freight connectivity, mostly embodied and exemplified by the China-Laos Railway that was opened in December last year. And we're seeing also the development of special economic zones, both on the border and on both sides of the border between China and the Laos. So of course, you know, with the China-Laos Railway or CLR, we're seeing the first layer of regionalization from inside China beginning to galvanize or converge to this new gateway city of Kunming, where the freight trains from northeastern, northwestern China begin to run cargo mobility or movements toward Kunming and then across the border into Southeast Asia. On the upper right, we see the city, mega city of Chengdu, very close to Chongqing, which I'll talk about at the last stage as the new land sea corridor. Okay. And so with regard to China and Europe, well, this is the conventional map, right? So the main route in the middle, and then you have the northern and eastern routes connecting through Russia to Europe. But if you look from the European side, right, the cities that normally don't show up or rank very high on the global city hierarchy, cities like Duisburg, Cologne, Dortmund, and others that really cluster together. So within this region that has a long history of connected heavy industries, you know, Rhine River-based shipping and petrochemicals, you know, coal, steel industries. And within this vicinity, you have multiple modes of transportation, and you have almost 30 million people, consumers, right, that can be easily accessed, you know, from cities like Duisburg. I recently interviewed both the city government, China representative, and the Duisport business executives who have shared some insights about the importance of China-Europe freight train that go through Duisburg. And of course, the external regional reach from this set of hubs, receiving the trains from China, sending some of them back. I've also obviously connected by river, by autobahn, by rail to other European cities that are reaching south and also connecting to the eastern part of the European Union that also much closer to Central Asia, which I will touch on again to illustrate how the third level or segment of regionalization between China and Europe linking Eurasia and will ultimately reconnect back to East Asia, to China through Central Asia and the Caucasus. So obviously the war has a strong impact on disrupting some of the established routes of the trains between China and Europe. But more recently, partially in response to the risk posed by the war, we have seen alternative routes beginning to pick up. And here we see, obviously, the land sea crossing across the Caspian and the Black Sea. And we see on the western side of the Caspian Sea, the overland routes between Baku, Tbilisi, and Kars. Again, a small city in northeastern Turkey, but it's a very well-known historic city on the Asian Silk Road. So the overland connection we see is being strengthened. And more recently, we have seen another movement, another development of the port city of Batumi in Georgia, right? And other than Poti to the north, now have began to connect to Kastan, the Iranian port on the western banks of the Black Sea, and also connections through Turkey and then to Piraeus, to Greece, right? Another alternative route. So what we're seeing here, to summarize, to bring the domestic regional transformation through the two turns, China's growing logistical infrastructure connection to its neighbors, and then the long distance connections to Europe. Now back from Europe, right, through Central Asia, we have the development of the new Land Sea Corridor, or NLS for short, that was launched in 2017 around the city of Chongqing, right? This is one of the 4 special central government administrative regions, and it's the operating center. It's the hub that channels and relays the trains coming back from Central Asia and then extends it to the port cities in Guangxi province or through Kunming along the China Lost Railway. So here we have an illustration of these new routes, right, that coming from the west to the south through Chongqing, and then down further south to Guangxi province that borders Vietnam. And recently I spoke to the Vietnamese Ministry of Agricultural Development about the importance of connecting the railways across the border between China and Vietnam. And of course, lo and behold, right, as a result of the Vietnamese General Party Secretary's recent visit to China and meeting with Xi Jinping, we have the new initiative, between the two countries to standardize and reconnect the standard gauge railway moving away from the century-old 1 meter wide gaugeway that was left by the French. So we see new railway that will connect between Kunming through Lao Cai, Haiphong, Hanoi, another railway that will connect from Guangxi across the border all the way down to Ho Chi Minh City along Vietnam. And of course, we see the cross-border shipping, from the ports in Guangxi, in Qingzhou, that now also accepts trains from multiple cities in China and sends them on to the ports of Vietnam, Malaysia, and ultimately to Singapore, which was originally the design for the southern transport corridor from Chongqing to Singapore. So I'm going to end on this summary 2x2 table to really highlight and stress the critical interconnections between 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So if you start from 1 and thinking about the earlier post-oriented development that has largely run its course in a way that has become matured and established, but now has also accumulated obviously a lots of resources. So a growing number of companies have also over the last few years relocated their operational base and production facilities from cities like Shenzhen and other coastal cities, following the growing westward turn of policy favorability, infrastructure investment, and the launch of some of the key interior cities to send trains to Europe. So we see 1 moving toward 2, and then extending toward 3, and then ultimately it come together in what I would call the 4th box, the lower right, where the domestic regionalization processes and the cumulative benefits of regional rebalancing, regional transformation, recombination of investment, particularly led by infrastructure transport connectivities, have brought many new cities and sub-regions into a growing and expanding network of infrastructure-led growing trade flows, mobility, and ultimately leading to opportunities for many of these left behind places to catch up on development. So I see all of this really as a somewhat quiet, understudied, bottom-up wealth or sources of stimulus and contributions that complements the interstate cooperations that we would like to see happening more and more between China and all the countries around China and beyond China in Europe. So I'll end on that point.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Professor Chen, for that very enlightening picture of how these developments are unfolding, both in the present and historically. I want to briefly just say a special thanks to Professor Diesen from Norway, because I understand that if he is still there, hopefully, I know he has to leave because of another engagement. But I'm very grateful for his important input on the question of the global security arrangement. I think, as I've already stated, but I think to underline that this has to go together with the Belt and Road Initiative, hand in hand. And I think it's very important to stress that the West has no monopoly on the idea of democracy and human rights and freedom, although they generally are very arrogant in believing that they do have a monopoly on these ideas. And by developing this kind of discussion and dynamic exchanges, I think we can break that kind of arrogant position that is not helping to bring the world closer to peace and community for a shared future for mankind. The last speaker for today is Professor Sandmark from the Schiller Institute, who will speak on the last, but perhaps from our standpoint, the most important position of Sweden to how we can bring about a change in thinking in Sweden in regards to the Belt and Road, and even in the way that it was proposed by Professor Diesen, a more just global security arrangement, which does not necessarily have to revolve exclusively and hopefully not around NATO. I will just say briefly, as I introduce Professor Sandmark, that I want to emphasize my own membership in the Chinese Bridge Club in Stockholm, which has played a very important role in promoting friendship and cooperation. There are many young Swedish members of this who have been learning excellent Chinese and are very optimistic about the cultural cooperation and exchange and friendship between Sweden and China. So there is a foundation there that I hope will lead us also into greater cooperation until 2023, next year. With that said, I would like to introduce Professor Sandmark to make his remarks. You're muted, Professor.
Thank you, Stephen. And I'm privileged to be part of this webinar. And so, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Schiller Institute in Sweden has congratulated the President of China and the General Secretary Xi Jinping and the Communist Party of China for the successful conclusion of the 20th Party Congress. I found the 20th Party Congress as a no-nonsense mobilizations to forge ahead, building China with very ambitious goals, which are called the Great Rejuvenation and Modernization of the Chinese nation. The determination expressed in this Congress to unite and lead the people to realize this goal should be very impressive for any outside observer. I see with great optimism the continued anchor role of China in promoting global peace development for mankind. The two initiatives, Global Development Initiative and the Global Security Initiative launched by President Xi, will be in the center stage for advancing peaceful cooperation between East and West. This is absolutely urgent, as the world was close to nuclear war in the middle of this month, when a stray missile hit a farm silo in Poland, killing 2 workers. The editors of Associated Press and other Western media blew this up as a military attack on NATO by Russia, even though there was no military meaning in attacking a farm. NATO irresponsibly called a meeting in Brussels to discuss implementing Article 4 or possibly Article 5, which is a full war. If there is no instigation by irresponsible forces to further destabilize the global peace and economic development, the people-centered policy which China has put in place has the best potential to fully realize the Chinese dream of national rejuvenation. I fully agree with what Professor Glenn Diesen said before about hegemony, so I will not repeat that, but go on to discuss more the economic principles here. The Belt and Road Initiative has soon for 10 years served as a foundation for global economic development and cooperation. Its success as the biggest development project in world history is a major factor in promoting peace. It is a model project promoting peace in the great tradition from the 1948 Westphalian Peace Treaty of ensuring peace by promoting welfare of the other. That is a peace treaty for which Sweden is proud to have been the main signatory power beside Austria. To stop the war in Ukraine, the world needs immediately peace negotiations and like the Westphalian Peace Treaty, including an economic program to ensure peace, where Ukraine, instead of a war zone, could become a bridgehead for peace in Eurasia as part of the BRI. As an economist, I want to underscore the importance of China becoming a moderately prosperous country. It goes much beyond the comfort for the people with better living conditions, health service, food, and housing. The higher living standard also means a much higher potential productivity and a much higher labor power. The new welfare of the formerly extremely poor should not be seen as a cost, as most Western economists claim. Instead, it should be seen as an investment and the precondition for this enlargement of the labor force to develop the qualifications, making them able to contribute to the industrialization 4.0. The people-centered policy of poverty alleviation is therefore the source of tremendous future extra boost to the economy of China. The monetary standpoint is misunderstanding the poor people and the tremendous economic potential of the poverty alleviation success. From a market standpoint, the poor are not existing in the market economy as they have no buying power. I underscore this horrific theory in our money-centered market economy to point out that the most important effect of the people-centered policy of the CPC, from an economic standpoint, the recruiting of 850 million extremely poor to join the productive economy more than offsets the China's demographic downslide, which Western observers are so fond of pointing out. Problems are solved in China with such real physical economic measures. The people-centered policy has equipped the whole population, even in the most distant villages, with tools and reliable connections to the whole communication systems of telecommunication. The fixed broadband penetration in China has reached 96%, and the mobile broadband use was 108%. Every village in China has been reached by the policy of rural electrification, as well as road, rail, shipping, and parcel services. This is a non-monetary investment that will further increase the productivity of the new labor power. It produces and expands the productive economic space for an even broader economic growth. In Sweden, there is a saying, when the farmers are well off, the nation is well off. The main reason for this phenomenon is not that most people are farmers, but because the farmers are productive people and they're directly benefiting from any labor-saving machines. Any surplus income from farming is therefore productively investing, putting local industry to work. The welfare of the farmers increase more rapidly with the new machines at the same time as the industry grows. Also, productively working small and middle-sized entrepreneurs invest in the same way. Now, when the absolute poor are getting the nose over the water, our experience in Sweden was an explosion of productive investment, of extra schooling, also improvement of the family housing. Already from such general opportunities, we will see in China a tremendous hunger for innovation improvements in local production. The CPC particles put a tremendous focus on innovation and productivity in the poverty alleviation campaign and continues this policy of systematically enhanced innovation. What I want to stress is that Western monetarist economists misunderstand and underestimate the growth potential of China. One example where they just add figures without comprehending the real physical economy is the issue of debt burden of China. Debt invested productively is better the more it is and not a drag. Debt invested in the way China does it in physical infrastructure is a measure of economic strength, not a problem. It is only a problem when debt is invested in bubbles. But with financial bubbles, the Western economies should look more to their own problems than on China. Just adding figures is not enough to comprehend the concept of economic platforms, just as the rural development of China, also the gigantic reforestation of China. The expansion of the railway network is the most evident example of creating new economic platform, making room and new dimensions for tremendous jumps in the economic growth of China. This transport infrastructure is creating corridors like corridors of development, attracting traffic and economic growth, just like the German Autobahn highway system did for Europe. Neighbor countries prefer the German roads when possible to access neighbor countries. The same way, the Chinese transport will be used by other nations, especially in combination with the corridors developed through the Belt and Road Initiative. The system of seamless transportation is in itself a new platform, especially in combination with the new foreign payment system of the renminbi, as has been explained by Mr. Henry Tillman at our earlier webinars. The efficiency of these new channels are creating new space for growth. The corridors and the special economic zones of the BRI internationally are attracting investments from other countries even more than the Chinese foreign direct investments. These are economic growth potentials of China that figure-adding monetarist economists do not comprehend. What is needed is to understand that the minds like that of what is needed to understand that are the minds like that of engineers, entrepreneurs, or skilled workers, or the wisdom of exceptional statesmen, like we see in the leadership today in China. His Excellency Dmitry Mironchik challenged me to discuss Huawei. I can acknowledge it was a disaster for Sweden, who lost at least 2 years in the implementation of the 5G in Sweden. Also, it created tremendous problems for Ericsson, who was the leader of 5G development together with Huawei, developing its standards. It was a great mistake, as China, with its innovation and space development, is a channel, a corridor, also for industrial development of telecommunication companies. It is the place, the corridor, where you have to have presence. just like Silicon Valley. That physical economic understanding was totally lacking in the Swedish decision against Huawei. The whole process, people's democracy, of lovingly taking care of each citizen and each region, allowing them to take part in the modernization of production, must be respected as the highest wisdom and in harmony with nature. The late Mr. Lino LaRouche Jr., who this year was born 100 years ago, taught us that improving the conditions for creative mind of labor is the center for the physical economy. Just as the biosphere, before mankind entered the scene, raised itself to higher platforms for more efficient forms of life with the help of evolutionary revolutions in the forms and preconditions of life. The noosphere, where the mind is working, with the help of innovative human minds and productive labor, creates better platforms with potential of extending all kinds of life on planet Earth and beyond in the universe. Life is floating on such beautiful creative creation. As China so systematically is unleashing its freedom for its people to innovate, to create what no human on Earth could think of before, I am confident that China will continue to build new platforms for more productive and happy life for China and giving the economic weight of China globally more and more for all mankind and all the noosphere. No one can plan what will come out of the minds of a person doing innovation. In this way, the process of innovation both depends totally on and strengthens the people's power and democracy. A nation promoting innovation entrusts its future on the minds of its people to carry the nation forward. The whole people-centered economic policy of China, based on innovation, is a policy for exponential growth and definitely has the potential to fully mobilize the youth of China and realize the Chinese dream of true national rejuvenation, which so many in the world wish to see for the Chinese people after centuries of hard work and fierce struggle against vicious colonial repression. Thanks for the word.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sandmark. I think we can maybe propose that you should become the advisor to the present finance minister in Sweden to hopefully inform him of what he hasn't yet understood. That would be a big step in the right direction.
I'm trying.
Okay, I want to basically thank all of the speakers. For those who can remain, we do have time now for a Q&A and discussion session, whereby I think there are actually a number of questions that have already been posed in the chat, which my colleague, Mr. Askari, probably has a good picture of. So if that's the case, I'm not sure if Professor Diesen is still with us. I don't see him, but
we do have a question which was on the China-Europe Express Railway corridor, and His Excellency Ambassador Mironchik had taken the initiative to answer that question. Maybe we can start with that. It's a question from Mr. Alf Johansson. He says, how will the sanctions against Russia and Belarus influence the development and operation of the BRI corridors towards Europe? Will there be missing links, or will new routes emerge? Ambassador Mironchik.
Thank you very much. There were several questions, several points raised by distinguished speakers, which are of particular interest to my mind. As for the connectivity, you know, Belarus has never been the initiator of sanctions, and we deeply regret that illegal sanctions are being used against sovereign countries. According to the UN Charter, the only acceptable form of sanctions are sanctions introduced by the UN Security Council. What we do is we do everything possible to minimize negative influence of sanctions on third countries and keep intact those projects which still connect us and which create background for positive cooperation and hope for change and for the better. Belt and Road project is being at the core. I'm happy to say that so far our efforts to preserve it from negative impact of the current political disagreements between the West and Belarus have been quite successful. And as for the flows of goods through a railway corridor going through Russia and Belarus towards the West, these flows have not diminished, to say the least. We are doing our best to expand possibilities, and Minsk indeed serves a hub for railway transportation between Europe and Western China. Indeed, in reality, I sometimes when I try to give a helping hand both to Swedish and to Belarusian companies wishing to make use of this connectivity, I have to make an extra effort to find a spare slot so that they can add additional goods to the current flows, to the existing flows. If I may make two short remarks on other topics, on the topic of the vaccines, or we will come that to later stage, at a later stage, Mr. Askari.
No, you go ahead. Let me just read the question itself. It was from Mr. Henry Tillman from the China Investment Research. He said over the past 2 years, the BRI has moved to global health vaccine in 33 countries, 23 renewable projects, 25 countries, 10, he's mentioning the number $70 billion in 2022, no loans, only investments, but majority equity investment in industrial manufacturing. None of this is in the Western press. But you might want to address the question of the vaccine co-production project as part of the Health Silk Road, which we had discussions about before.
I can share a first-hand experience of Belarus in this regard and make some comparisons, which I consider to be unfortunate for our Swedish hosts. Back in 2020, at the height of the pandemic, Belarus, as other smaller nations, was looking for a possibility to vaccinate its population as soon as possible. We were eager to buy any vaccine available. Of course, Sweden is proud to be a co-founder and co-host world-famous pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca. That's why fairly shortly after the beginning of the pandemic and right after, we got information that AstraZeneca is successful in creating vaccines. I got official instructions from my capital to get in touch with the company and to negotiate with them import of vaccines. I did just that. Yet our request was it took a very long time for AstraZeneca Sweden to handle the request, and they only referred it to regional office of AstraZeneca, where it took even longer time to process it, and then we received a formal answer, which can be watered down to a simple no, we are not selling. It wasn't whether they are ready to sell it now or in the future, or if they want to get more money for us from us for the vaccines. It was a blank no, we are not selling to you. At the same time, since the beginning of the pandemic, we received 5 million doses of vaccines from China as a donation. And we started receiving these vaccines virtually immediately after they were accepted for usage in China domestically. These vaccines saved a lot of lives, and these vaccines proved to be effective. And we also bought 4.6 million doses of the vaccines. Again, we continue receiving these vaccines as a support, as a donation from China. And most recently, there was another tranche of 2 million doses. So I think that China is leading by example when it comes to vaccines. I would also like to echo what Professor Chen said. This in-depth analysis of regional development in China indeed helps to understand the logic and the directions of the development of Chinese foreign policy and economic cooperation. And we took a very early note of this shift of focus in Chinese policies towards continental provinces, towards Western China. It is then when we saw additional possibilities for ourselves to get connected and to develop cooperation. And that's where Belt and Road initiative started, really. It went from the internal Chinese logic and got a very pronounced foreign dimension. And now regional cooperation plays a very important role in the cooperation between Belarus as a country and China as a country. And we put a special stress on cooperation with the regions of Western China. This indeed brings an additional momentum into our cooperation with the People's Republic of China. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I would just like to add one point to the question on the China-Europe Express Railway from our own research, because sometimes it's quite useful that the Western media does not discuss the Belt and Road Initiative because they get everything wrong. So what happened when the Ukraine crisis broke out, the Western media think tanks, it was full with articles and reports that Mr. Putin has killed the new Silk Road or the Eurasian Silk Road. So what we did is we actually went and looked at what rail companies and shipping companies were doing at the time, instead of looking at what the media is reporting. And then we had this article on the matter. What we discovered is that actually at the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, yes, there was a small pause in the shipment of goods from the west to the east, but it never stopped from the east to the west. One important point which we also highlighted, which everybody else ignored, is that this China-Europe Express Railway is so important, and it has become such a great vehicle of economic cooperation, supply chain support. It was impossible for the EU to impose sanctions on the Belarus and Russian railway companies. So the Belarus and Russian railway companies were exempt from the sanctions. There were no sanctions on the railway sector in Russia and Belarus. And while others were trying to find alternative routes, they actually failed, because this is the most seamless and most effective route to bring goods, especially high technology products, to Europe and from Europe to China. So it was fascinating to see that this route not only continued, but actually this year it's going to grow compared to other years, although not at the same pace, because as we have reported, the China-Europe Railway Express has gone from 170 trains per year in 2011 to 15,000 trains last year. This year it will increase, but only by 3–4%, but it is not dead, it's not finished, as the media here are trying to portray. And this shows how important this connectivity between China, Europe, China, and other parts of the world has become as an important part of the globalization and economic cooperation among nations.
Just a very small point, and we never politicize this topic. We never view it as a card to play. This is something which unites us, and when I say us, I am speaking beyond Belarus and beyond China as well. Thank you.
Maybe just add a little bit of complication to the discussion. In my interviews, with people who are working very closely in Germany, receiving these trains, I think that the change, I think, has been up and down. But for Duisburg, which receives the largest number of trains from China, at its peak was about 60 trains a week last year. But now that number has come down quite a bit, and to about 30, between 30 and 40. So there's a fairly strong impact. But that impact, I think, has been very uneven and partially been offset by more trains originating from more cities within China to Central Asia. So the China-Central Asia connections and have been strengthened. And also, I think when the Chinese government accounts the total number of trains, and now they have broadened the category, the definition to include, obviously, the fourth category, the fourth regional segment that I talked about, which are the trains that are now through the land and sea combined corridors going to Southeast Asia. But if you look at, the number of European cities receiving the trains, and that number has increased over time. In other words, there are more trains that are going to Europe, but not necessarily to the original smaller number of hub cities. So they have been distributed more broadly, but there's been some negative impact on the operation of the trains, not only because of the war. I think a lot of it has to do with some of the technical challenges of clearing the trains across the crucial hubs on the borders, that in some way you could think about them as choke points. And that's why Kazakhstan has been upgrading Atakal and Dosek, these two crucial border rail stations, because right now they process maybe 15 trains a day, but they would like to get to 60 trains a day. So if you can improve those critical points, including Brest in Belarus, right, and Malashwitz on the city between Belarus and Poland, then I think that will help further mitigate, some of the difficulty and challenges in how fast and these trains can cross these multiple borders.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Askari, are there more questions?
No, I think we have summed up many of the questions.
Okay.
So if the other panelists have something to say or want to comment, Ambassador Sway, if you want to comment on what has been discussed here, you are welcome to do that.
Yes, please, Ambassador.
发个言，做个评论。
刚才听完了各位这个嘉宾呢和这个学者专家们的一些发言呢，我感到啊，这个非常的有收获，有体会，因为大家从很多不同的角度都这个有独特的这个视角和精辟的见解，谈到了很多这个关于“一带一路”发展方面的这个一些认识和看法。
I had the pleasure to listening to the presentations made by the guests and scholars. I have learned quite a lot from these presentations. They gave me insights into the development of Belt and Road from your very special and own perspectives.
这不但让我们更好的开展“一带一路”的有关建设，更好的实现呢这个这个共商共建共享的这么个原则和宗旨。这个更有信心和底气，同时啊，也让我们找到了更好的跟大家共同推进这个“一带一路”建设的有关的这个办法，或者说是这个在这方面有更好的一个沟通的一个能力和发展的一个前景。
Your presentations give me confidence in promoting the work on the BRI for shared benefits through collaboration and discussion, and gave me better opportunities for communication on making efforts together to promoting the BRI.
我们将高举和平发展和共赢的这个旗帜，坚持啊和平发展、公平、正义、民主、自由的全人类这个共同价值，啊，这个在这个相互尊重啊，这个和平相处和互利共赢的基础上啊，把这个“一带一路”这个工程啊，这个倡议啊，给它实施好、发展好，把这个我们未来的世界啊，建造成就是我们习近平总书记所提到的啊，永久和平、持续的安全、共同的繁荣，是吧？开放包容和清洁美丽的这么一个世界，我们要贡献出我们新的力量。我相信呢，这个中华民族的伟大复兴，不仅仅是中国人自己的事情，而且也必将给整个全世界、全人类的发展带来更大的机遇啊！它将造福各国和各国人民。谢谢。再一次借这个机会呢，感谢这个主席先生、副主席先生、各位阁下以及我们所有的嘉宾、所有的专家学者和所有的参加线上讨论的这个朋友们对这一类建设的关心和支持。谢谢大家。
We will continue to hold high the banner of peace, development, and win-win cooperation. We will continue to be committed to the shared values of humanity, of peace, development, fairness, justice, democracy, and freedom. We will continue to develop the BRI well, based on principles of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win benefits. And we will strive to build the world of the future into what President Xi Jinping has described as a world of lasting peace, shared security, a world that is clean and beautiful. We are confident that the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation will continue to make greater contributions to the development of this world. I'd like to thank all of you again, the guests, scholars, and chairman and vice chairman of BRIX for hosting this event, and I'd also like to thank the friends online for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Ambassador Shui, both for your concluding remarks and your very important presentation on the important results and ideas of the 20th National Congress, for all the people who hopefully will hear some of this in Sweden and understand something about the results and the implications that they otherwise are not getting any adequate information, or unfortunately no information at all in principle. So if there are no other further questions. I don't know if the ambassador Mironchik, if you wanted to make some brief closing remark from your side. No, I think he made some very important contributions in the question and answers. Professor Lee.
Yes, and I do not have any further comment. I saw one comment on my presentation. This listener, he or she wants to have a copy of my PPT, so I have already done it. I'm very effective. So I think that this is a very good event. And also I'm very happy to see my friends, Professor Chen Xiangming, also on board. I think that in the future that I expect Belt and Road Institute is going to organize more seminars like this to spread our values, common understanding on Belt and Road. As I emphasize, I do not see, I want to echo Stefan's word again, that I do not see a lot of news about Belt and Road, and also any news regarding what President Professor Chen Xiangming has told us. He gave a very detailed spreading presentation on all kind of connectivities. Who knows these informations? I don't think any of our citizens know very much apart from this seminar where we try to disseminate all these knowledges. So I really hope that that you, Stefan, and Hussein are going to organize more events like this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And we will organize many more webinars like this in the coming year. We will celebrate the anniversary of the 10th year of the Belt and Road. And we will, in my view, optimistically, not simply, but with a lot of hard work, we will break this censorship. And if these countries in Europe love to talk about freedom, they're going to have to actually open the channels for a true and open dialogue on these ideas and these points of view, which at the moment they are not willing to do. So our work will continue unabated. It will not stop. It will continue to go forward. And with all of the support we have from our speakers, Professor Chen, I didn't see you before. Did you have some concluding words? Your presentation has already been remarked as very important for the public to understand how these dynamics are going forward. We will do our best to make that information available in Sweden, despite the difficulties. But this webinar will be promoted on YouTube, so everybody can share and spread it. But if you had something more you wanted to add, Professor Chen?
Yeah, just a couple of final words to thank you and Hussein and distinguished guests, including the Excellency Ambassador Cui, and good to see you again. I think we had an earlier seminar together. I think Professor Lee and others who obviously have written a lot about the BRI, from a political economy, international relations perspective. I've learned a lot from that body of work. And I think my own approach to this obviously reflects my background and training as a student and scholar of cities and regional development. I think this is sort of an area or part of the intellectual discourse on the BRI that is beginning to emerge, through more scholarly work among some geographers, actually quite a bit of a few of them in Europe. I've recently been asked to review a proposed book about the material, physical, infrastructural impact and imprints of the BRI. So that's a good sign that, you know, scholars are turning towards the BRI by looking at all of these already spatialized, but emerging geographic connections across a lot more cities that previously were not connected. I think BRI has done something, you know, cumulatively, but something very significantly of bringing in more cities, particular cities in some developing countries, in the developing parts of the world, and even the decline, deindustrialized cities in the advanced European world together to form a increasingly global network of cities and regions. And that kind of connection at that scale ultimately matters most to the lives of the people living in these cities. And that's why I think that we need to really, you know, keep our eyes on the ground and how BRI actually impacts and transforms, you know, urban development, livelihoods, opportunities, you know, for people who otherwise have been left behind and have not been fully integrated into the better results of a more connected global economy.
And Stefan, one more point from my side, that is that I want to congratulate Hussein for his article on analyzing the debt issue of Sri Lanka. Now I begin to hear a lot of people in Europe begin to talk about the Chinese debt is only 1/3 or 1/4 of the total debt. Now people begin to realize, because when we talk about, when I heard a lot of Belt and Road, they are connected with the new imperialism, new colonialism, and debt trap. So I think I want to congratulate you, Belt and Road Institute, for disseminating proper knowledge to enlighten people, to correct people's understanding. And this is a marvelous job you have done. Okay, this is my final comment.
Thank you, Professor Lee. And I fully agree. My colleague, Mr. Askari, is doing a fantastic job in putting together the real facts and making sure that they are getting out to the people who otherwise are not receiving them. And we will continue that work in the coming period by all means, with the help of all of you. I think this, from the comments I've been seeing on the chat, this has been, some people are referring to this as the most successful webinar, the most dynamic that we have had up until now. I think that's very true, that this is an extremely effective and dynamic discussion, and the results of which I hope will spread widely here in Sweden and around the west of Europe and the world. And I want to thank everybody who participated, and I hope to have more of this kind of dynamic discussion in the coming year, in 2023. So I'm very happy. I think it's a very successful event, and I want to thank, well, I don't, one last point might be, Mr. Askari, if you had seen the statement from Mr. Vesby that he wants to introduce, I believe, to the Norwegian Chamber of Commerce, if that's not incorrect.
Yes, he writes one of the best, if not the best, BRICS seminars when it finally got started. All excellent speakers, thank you. He also says, I will promote it at the NCCC, the Norway China Chamber of Commerce meeting tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Turavetsky.
Excellent. That is the type of spreading of knowledge that we will continue to work for. So thank you for that. And otherwise, I want to thank everybody again. And I think at this point, we will close the webinar for this occasion.
Bye-bye.